The General Data Protection Regulation is the first review of data protection in the UK for over 20 years. And with the replacement of the current Data Protection Act 1998 with the GDPR, data subjects are empowered to control their own information for the first time. So organisations that have collected information on customers, members or supporters over the years may consider it to be an asset of the organisation, but no longer. Data subjects like you and I will have control over our data like never before. The definition of personal information is also much broader than most people realise. Yes, it's your name, your address, your mobile number, your email address, but it also includes other categories of information about you, such as physical, physiological and location, your health information for example. All of this is personal information that is effectively an identifier, and so therefore falls under the General Data Protection Regulation. Organisations that wish to collect this information and to process this information about you will require a condition to do so. The most commonly known, of course, is consent, but there are some other conditions that we'll talk about later. But each organisation will require one of these conditions to process your information. It's worth also mentioning that corporate information, so business-to-business information, is not covered by the GDPR. Effectively, your business-to-business communication, so emailing from one corporate account to another, is not covered by the GDPR. PECA, which we'll come on to shortly, which is the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation, talks about this very specifically, and it enables business to carry on as normal. However, as I've mentioned before, information that identifies you, such as your name for example, may also appear in your business email address. So therefore, it's recommended that an opt-out is put at the footer of your corporate email account to ensure that you are allowing the individual the opportunity to opt out of communications. So that footer, that opt-out, effectively talks to the individual, not the employee of the organisation. And PECA, as I just mentioned, which is the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation, controls communications that are sent via electronic channels. So that would be SMS, email and telephone. PECA does require consent if you are emailing marketing information to members or customers or supporters. So this is a very important area, and the PECA, the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation, runs alongside the General Data Protection Regulation. So whenever we are considering, for example, data subjects' rights, we will need to look at both of these pieces of legislation. Here's a few terms that you'll hear a lot when considering data protection and the GDPR. A definition of a data subject is a natural living person. Interestingly, the GDPR doesn't cover deceased people, so this is only about living people and information that relates to them. Another term you'll hear a lot of is data controller. So according to the GDPR, it's the organisation, but quite often organisations will appoint a particular person to become the data controller. I think this is really important because sometimes if a member of the public wants to make an inquiry about the way their data is being used, they'll want to speak to somebody. And I think appointing and publishing the details and contact information for a person who is the data controller is really good advice. Another term is data processors. So a data processor is an organisation that undertakes a task on behalf of the data controller. So a really good example of that would be your local printer. You have to share your information with the printer for them to print letters or invites to an event. During that time, and during the time that they are holding that information or processing that information on your behalf, you have to take responsibility for them. So if there is a breach, and the information is lost, stolen, or shared with a inappropriate third party, it will be your responsibility to deal with the situation. The Information Commissioner will look to you for an explanation as to why this has happened. So this is a really good reason to have compliant processors. So look at their compliance, look at whether they've trained their staff, look at how long they're going to retain your information for after the task is finished, and set some ground rules. They really should be as compliant as you are in every respect regarding data protection. The role of Data Protection Officer has come very much under the spotlight in recent months. it's very important, if you are going to appoint a data protection officer, and in many cases you will not be obliged to, that you look for the right person who's informed and has the necessary experience in data protection as a whole. That person is required to have knowledge, to be kept up to date with changes to the GDPR, but also, most importantly, to be able to offer you impartial advice and have an opinion. You don't have to take the advice of your data protection officer, but I think it would be a wise move to do so if you are going to appoint one. And processing is a word that you'll hear a lot of in the GDPR. Processing is whenever you touch information about a data subject. So whether you're collecting the information, deleting the information, storing it, or indeed using it to create direct marketing or to reach out to a group of individuals about a particular project that you're running. Essentially, whenever you're using information, then you are processing information.